Hello and welcome to the Neurodivergent Teens Podcast. Hi everybody, welcome to the Neurodivergent Teens Podcast. In this episode, I am going to be chatting to Lila about their experience of being a trans woman and a neurodivergent trans woman.
Yes, many different things going all at the same time.
The first thing that we were going to talk about is the fact that a higher percentage of the trans community are neurodivergent compared to... Which way round is it? Is it that there's more neurodivergent people in the trans community or that there's more trans people in the neurodivergent community?
It's a good question because, they're basically both correct. I would say that in terms of the spaces I inhabit, online and in person, I see a lot more of like neurodiversity within trans groups than trans groups within neurodiversity. But that could just be because I spend a specific amount of my time with young trans people who are very aware of neurotypes. So that could be like a selection bias going on. But yeah, it's kind of, if you're autistic, you're more likely to be trans. If you're trans, you're more likely to be autistic. There's a correlation of if you're atypical in one area, you're likely to be atypical in another.
Okay. Obviously, I've known you for 3 years now, Lila?
Yes, 3 years.
And I have to say that I felt very privileged when you came out as trans. You know, you shared that information with me before you came out more publicly.
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you for that. Professionally coming out was the last step I did. And I think you were the first professional contact I had who I came out to. And coming out, particularly as somebody who has, lived a decent part of their life as a different gender is a difficult thing to do, particularly when you're not certain how it's going to go down. I knew that you were accepting a cunt, so I didn't worry about that. But in terms of family members, friends, colleagues, it can be really scary coming out, particularly as somebody who is ridiculously sensitive.
And that's a really important thing that you've brought up there, isn't it? That I can imagine for any young person to come out as trans must be quite frightening, depending on the support you've got. I'm sure for any trans person, it's going to be a big deal. When you couple that with the rejection sensitivity that neurodivergent people are more likely to experience, I guess it could make that process more frightening.
Yes. Something that I have quite often is, although I'm very openly and proudly trans, I struggle correcting people. That's something I want to do more, particularly because I work in a school and I often get referred to as Mr. Langton instead of Miss Langton or he instead of she. It takes more willpower than I'm happy with to speak up and say, oh, actually, it's not Mr., it's Miss. It's not he, it's she. And I think that's because I'm quite sensitive and I'm worried about it being taken the wrong way. I'm worried about asserting myself in a way that's quite uncommon. And that definitely links to my neurodiversity in terms of feeling so uncertain about my emotions. I don't want to take up any space.
Yeah, it's just an added layer, I guess, in the whole process. When did you realize that you were trans? Was it something that you've always known? Was it can you talk through that a little bit more?
For me personally, I realized in January of this year, just about 10 months ago, I think. And it was something that I never realized.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, there's this really good book called Nevada by Imogen Binney. And she's a trans woman. And I could relate quite strongly to her experience of a lot of people assuming that, from a very young age, you knew when you were 6, you liked to wear dresses, you liked to play with dolls. And a lot of conceptions about trans women, particularly young trans women, is that they're very effeminate, they're very slim, and they've always known this. And as soon as they transition, they kind of disappear into the background. And that's not how it works for a lot of us. I didn't realize I was trans until I was 20. And although I knew that there was something definitely queer going on, I could not label it for the life of me until this year. And it was the source of a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, lots of therapy sessions that didn't go anywhere because I didn't know what was happening. And it took me just staring in the mirror one day, as I'd slowly been experimenting with my gender more and more, to realize that I was really happy with the fact that I looked a little bit feminine that day and just wanted to keep on being feminine, pushing it as much as I could.
That's so interesting. And of course, there will be some people listening to this whose experience would be that from a really young age, they identified as a different gender. That might be someone's experience, but it's really interesting what you've just said, because I actually worked with a young person for a long time who is trans. And it was really interesting because before they came out as trans, similar for them, it was like, oh, I'm trans.
Yeah.
But actually, what was really interesting is that when they were female, before they transitioned, they dressed incredibly like girly. Like, it was almost like they were exaggerating that femininity. It was a very similar experience that you explained, that it was like almost like a penny dropping. That's what's going on here. That moment when you looked in the mirror and you thought, I'm a woman, was that like a moment of like euphoria of like, I know what's going on now? Or how did you feel when you had that clarity?
For a lot of people, it can arise a whole array of emotions. I did feel like an intense sense of euphoria, kind of like I was waking up. And like within half an hour, I went downstairs and I told my mum and I told my sister. I mean, I had a really nice chat, like an hour, just making jokes. And I felt really chilled out and happy. But for a lot of people, like I am kind of an exception in terms of the average experience in the trans community. My family like that I am happy, and they are happy that I'm trans because that has made me a functional human and like quite proud of myself. For a lot of people, there is a reasonable fear surrounding coming out, recognizing that, and they can't say for certain that they will get that support. And so often it can be a mixture of joy that they know who they are, anticipation for what could come, nervousness because this is an entirely new life, fear about family, about jobs, about friends. There's all sorts of things. But for me, it was just a very exciting moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I mean, obviously, I know your family a little bit, and I know that they are amazing and incredibly supportive. So I know that you've been really fortunate there. But as you said, that's not going to be everybody's experience. And again, I've worked with young people who are trans who haven't received the same support, unfortunately, from their parents, or they might have received it from one parent, but it's been a lot harder for another parent to
I know a lot of cases that are more close to that.
Yeah,
it's tough. It's really difficult.
Yeah. And then, of course, wider family as well, being understanding and accepting. I can imagine, my grandparents, for example, particularly one of my grandmas, would just not have been able to get her head around it at all. She would have been, I mean, I can't imagine her reaction if she had been told that one of her grandchildren was trans. I think she would have just said something like, oh, it's just a phase.
It's the phase, yeah.
Or it's fashion.
That's one thing I know we did want to talk about is generational differences. Just the difference of 10 or 15 years in each generation makes wild variety of behaviors. Like, obviously there is a larger proportion of the like Gen Z and even Gen Alpha generation who are openly LGBTQ as opposed to the older generations. And the younger generations tend to be more accepting, although not all of them, particularly like young white men can be quite egregious. But then there are some like millennials who are really accepting. And then there are the older generation who have a tendency towards being less accepting, but also some of them are lovely. On an individual level, it can vary, but generationally speaking, it's like the younger you are, the more likely you are to be exposed to the kind of content that makes you more accepting of LGBTQ people.
I think my first experience of meeting gay friends was when I was at university. And
yeah, I remember that too. Like even I went to secondary school 4 years ago now. And even then it was like a big deal when like somebody came out as gay. I think it happened once and he got like a boatload of questions and then probably felt very uncomfortable because it is not something that is seen as normal to the point of if it happens, no one minds. It's expected that you aren't gay and then or queer or trans. And then when you are, it becomes sort of an object of fascination. And the same right to privacy that you would have had if you weren't queer kind of goes away a little bit as people just asking questions and making your life more public. And that can be very difficult, especially when you're young.
I think for myself, like my generation, well, it's true. One of the things that I know I am is accepting. One of the things I know I am not is educated. I've still got so much to learn about this topic. And I worked with a wonderful trans client a few years ago who was so happy to kind of educate me. I was like, I don't know what all these terms mean. Like, what's cis? What's this? What's that? And they were like, Kate, Laura, I'm going to give you a lesson in all of this. And I was like, yes, please, because it's so important for me, particularly because I work with young people and I work with young neurodivergent people, that I'm saying the right thing. And I know that I don't always get it right. And I was going to ask you, Lila, have you experienced people saying the wrong thing, using your dead name? How does that make you feel? How do you deal with that when it happens?
That is a very good question. And it depends on the situation you're in. Obviously, if you haven't come out yet, like I've got a neighbor who still calls me by my old name and I haven't told him anything. And so I'm not going to get upset when he gets my name wrong. If it is a close family friend or somebody you're in a relationship with, if they were to dead name me or misgender me, all I would do is kindly correct them. And most of the time they will correct themselves. They'll go, oh, sorry, meant to say Lila. And in that case, I just say, that's okay. And then we continue talking. The only issues really arise from people who are too young to have been exposed to this before and so will demand that, no, you aren't a girl, which is very funny. I've had to deal with that quite a few times. Or people who refuse to understand. In those kind of situations, it'd be best just to not engage if you can. But most of the time, people aren't like overtly unkind. At the worst, they're largely ambivalent. So what I would do is I would simply correct them. Not in a mean way, just say, oh, I changed my name recently, it's Lila.
And so with your workplace, have they been supportive?
They have. They've been lovely. I did worry about that a lot. And although on the individual level, sometimes there are like issues in terms of me getting misnamed, they correct themselves and it's lovely. And I have like all the kids at work. I spoke to, I think it was on Monday, some of the girls in year 5 came up and one of them said, have you changed your name? And I said, yep, it's Miss Langton now. It used to be Mr. G, it's Miss Langton. I was like, it's because I'm a girl now. And she said, no, you're not. And I said, yes, I am. And I had to explain it like quite patiently because that can happen a lot, particularly with young people.
And I think it's wonderful that these children have the opportunity to be with someone like you. You're going to be teaching them so much around acceptance and understanding. And I'm sure there are young people you work with who are possibly trans and are going to look to you as somebody that has inspired them actually and being able to sort of look and think, well, Miss L.
I get that a lot.
Yeah, Miss L. She's an amazing person and I really like her. And I'm sure if you were to stay in that place of work for some time, I'm sure, Lila, that someone will come to you eventually and say this is something that potentially they've been questioning and you could really help a young person.
That was experience. Like perk of being openly trans and proud of it is that it allows other people who are trans to be open and proud of it.
So we know that not everybody is going to have the same experience that you've had. You know, your experience has been very positive. You know, your family had been very accepting, your work had been very accepting, but, you know, not everybody is going to have that same support. So what would you advise, Lila, if somebody is listening to this and they know that they're trans or they're questioning their gender, but they're frightened to talk to a parent or they're frightened to talk to a teacher because they don't know what response they're going to get and they may not feel that they're going to get the support that you have had? Like, what would you advise? Who could they talk to? What support is out there for them?
That is a very good question and one that I've had to ask myself a couple of times because I've been in that situation. The easiest things to do that anybody who's like questioning can do without fear of much like social ostracization is to get online, to fight trans communities. I know that Reddit is quite good for that. There's this one blog called Stained Glass Woman. She's a trans woman. She's been out for 4 years, I think. And she's great. I love her. She's a professor and she does like articles on what it's like to be trans and how to come out anywhere, to family, to friends, to work. Her articles on coming out are really good. And in terms of more like meat space, real world people, it's best to try and start safe so you can build up confidence. So maybe you have friends who are already queer. Maybe you're in a close relationship with somebody who you trust to let them know. Maybe you have like a grandma or a granddad who is quite open about that and wouldn't judge you in like a heartbeat. It is inherently a very difficult thing to do. And sometimes you will be in situations like with parents who don't accept you. And in that situation, the best thing you can do is find a way to get some money, work, and then move out because you can't educate everyone. Like, just if you don't have the people in your life who are accepting you now, you need to find a way to leave those people and find the ones who will. which is easy to say for me as an adult with a job, but it's difficult when you're young if you don't have family who accept you. So the safest things to do would be to go online. Stained Glass Woman is good. Find other trans people. Find other trans people in person. I really want to stress that in person is like a game changer, the most important part. And if you are in a situation where you aren't being supported, get out.
Yeah. And particularly if you coming out actually makes you feel unsafe as well. I think that's really important that you've got that get out as well. We've talked about this already in some of the other episodes about just being neurodivergent. It's so important that you can be authentic. And as neurodivergent people, we're already masking to fit in. So masking your neurodiversity and then masking your gender and as well, like it must double the kind of weight of the mask that you're carrying around. And I think also it must be confusing as well sometimes. Like, people must question, am I trans? I don't know. And I guess those forums are probably really helpful to have a safe place to ask questions and really get a better understanding of yourself before taking bigger steps of coming out.
Yeah. I mean, I was so full of doubts for like half a year because it's such a big thing and it's difficult to wrap your head around when you've been living like as the opposite gender for 20 years. It takes a while for your brain to accept that. And obviously starting slow allows you to have the chance to change your mind if you want to. And that's a big benefit of taking it slow is it gives you the option to back out at any time. And when you have that like option in your head, it feels like more of a choice and less of a thing you have to do. There's a big thing in like trans communities for people who've recently realized that you have to like be 110% certain or you're not really trans and you're doing it for fake reasons. And that's obviously very silly, but the fear is so strong that it stops people in their tracks like multiple times.
So can I ask as well, Lila, have you spoken to anybody or have you done a thing about changing your physical appearance since you've become a trans woman?
Yeah, obviously that's like a big part of transition. One thing I do want to stress is that you don't have to do that to be trans. Like I have non-binary friends who aren't on any medication and don't have like any surgeries. And I have non-binary friends who have, but still go by their old name and their old pronouns. So like it does depend. Each transition is deeply personal and there is no check mark for which you have to reach, otherwise you're not trans.
Really important point.
Yeah, like each one is individual. There is no like goal you have to reach. It is very much your choice. You take it slowly or as quickly as you want. I got extremely lucky. I live near Brighton and there are it's called an informed consent model. There's some informed consent clinics there. Being trans in this country is kind of bad. It's not very good. The healthcare system requires you to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and it requires you to have 2 psychiatric assessments and also occasionally to require you having lived in your gender for 6 months before you can get onto hormones. And that can take years. The waiting list is often around anywhere between 4 and 6 years. And for children, it's currently around 3 or 4, particularly because they closed the only GIDS clinic in March and they've failed to restaff an appropriate number. I'm currently like emailing my GP about this. It's a whole thing. But obviously now that I'm on HRT, I'm a lot more comfortable in my body. And I have noticed a few changes. Like I have a lot less body hair. I have like hair on my head is growing back a lot thicker. My skin is a lot softer. I smell different, which is lovely. I have to shower less often, which is gross, but very, convenient for me. But it changes everything. Like eye shape, finger width, height can change by 1 inch or 2. It can change bone density, muscle mass, metabolism, sexuality can change quite strongly. Although that one's variable. Like it is every single facet of your body is liable to be molded and manipulated by hormones because they mark a key part of our physical growth. And having been on HRT has like vastly improved my life for the better. And I feel a lot more excited and just happy. And I'm still early days as well. I can still look in the mirror and go, oh no, that's not what I want to see. But I'm still just happy to be on HRT and excited about my body because I have that future ahead of me.
So if someone's listening to this and they would like to take that step, should they go to their GP initially or would you recommend going to more of a sort of specialist?
Honestly, it's a really tricky one because this country is awful for trans healthcare. If you live an hour and a half away from Brighton or within that like time frame, change your GP to WellBN. They are being like overwhelmed by the amount of trans people who want their informed consent model, they might do shared care for your GP. So if you live near Brighton, try and change it to Wellbeing. That's WELLBN. They got me into hormones within like 3 months. And if you live in like West Sussex, I think you get options to fertility preservation for 10 years, voice training, stuff like that. I think the only realistic way you're going to be able to get HRT in this country right now is to go private, which is really expensive. Like would be £60 to £100 a month.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of money. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's terrible really that there's such a high financial cost attached to people feeling happy in their bodies.
Yeah, it's actually really annoying because being trans means that in this current world, it's like your happiness is locked behind a paywall. I have like laser surgery on my face and I don't really have any facial hair anymore. And I love that. That's great. And I'm also doing like voice training. Like most of my paycheck goes towards like transitioning. And I'm lucky that I have that option. Like not even just like a privilege. A lot of people don't have that option and they are being punished for something that isn't their fault.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to ask you, Lila, well, I first want to say I love the name Lila.
Thank you.
And I just wondered why you chose it.
I thought it just sounded pretty. Like I came across a game called Who's Lila? It's a very meta like weird game, very fun to play. But I just like the name and it stuck in my head. So I chose it. I was going to do Lola initially, but there's a song about a trans woman called Lola. I thought Lula wasn't my vibe. There are so many trans women called Luna and like Lily. So I was just like, screw it, Lila, that'll have to be it. And it seems to be good.
It really suits you as well. I really like
you.
Well, thank you for this chat. I thank you for your honesty and your openness and educating me a little bit more. Because as I said, it's definitely something that I need more education on. So are there any other links or organisations, Lila, that you think would be good to share with people?
Yes, absolutely. So online resources when you are kind of coming to terms with your gender that I found really helpful were Stained Glass Woman, who I mentioned before. There's also something called the Gender Dysphoria Bible, which goes through like every single change that masculinizing and feminizing HRT can provide you. There's something called the Null Hypothesis. The cis part of that's spelled CIS because, it's a pun. And that was a really lovely blog for like working out how to understand like your own gender. I would also just open up Google and see if there are any queer spaces nearby. I go to one at my local library. There's also one at like a church in Brighton that I go to. There are a whole bunch of them nearby. You just have to like Google them depending on your area. And also, if you're in school, I would recommend perhaps reaching out to any counsellors that the school have. Maybe they have a social, emotional and life skills coach or something that you could speak to regarding that. Because if you can get the school to help you through your transition, then that can give you a lot of confidence, particularly because you know that like basically administration is on your side. If you're dealing with bullying or something like that at school, it's nice to know that somebody has your back, particularly if that somebody is the head teacher.
Yes, absolutely. And I think schools are definitely having more of a focus on LGBT awareness and understanding now as well, because it's something that does affect so many young people and it's something that they do need to be made more aware of. Yeah.
It's a big thing at the school I work at. We had a rainbow day, which is like a Pride Week day. And that was lovely. I wasn't out by that point, but I came in wearing a coat with loads of like queer patches on. I had makeup all over my face and I dyed my hair a stronger blue for it. It was a lot of fun. And all we ended up teaching the kids was that it's okay to wear clothes that aren't associated with your gender and to be proud of yourself. And that is just a really simple, nice lesson to be able to teach young people.
Such an important message. It comes back down to just allowing people to be authentic and that they can feel safe and comfortable being authentic as well. Lila, this has been really, really fascinating. So, and thank you for sharing, as I said, and thank you everyone for listening. And I hope you have found this helpful.
Yes, thank you for having me. It is my favorite thing to talk about, like whenever. So it was a pleasure.